All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It is 2 o'clock right on the dot. And for those of you who have attended our coffee shop webinar sessions in the past, you know, we like to start on time today. But to give people a few minutes to get settled and logged in, we'll just go through a few housekeeping items. If you are here today, first of all, to see me, Amy Wong of .org Solutions, and Lyn Sabino of Lyn Sabino Consulting, talk about keeping your strategic plan front and center, you are in the right place. So we're so glad to have you. And it's hard to believe that it's the end of May, that we've been talking about strategic planning for 4 months now, and that this whole entire session is wrapping up. So for those of you who may have missed some of the previous sessions, those are available on our YouTube channel. So you can go ahead and see those previous sessions as well. Welcome to our webinar today. As I said, I'm Amy Wong, and I'm the president and founder of .org Solutions. We are a marketing, fundraising, consulting, and strategic planning firm that specializes in nonprofits. If you could do just a quick favor for me, though, before I get too far into this, if you could just do a little wave or throw in the chat that you can hear us and you can see us, that would be great. Fantastic. All right, so just a quick explanation of how our coffee shop format works in case you've never joined us before. Only the panelists will be visible on the call, and all participants will be muted. So while you can see us, unfortunately, we cannot see you, but we do want to encourage dialogue during our webinars. So make sure that if you have questions on anything at any time during the webinar, you can either throw that in the Q&A or chat, and we'll do our best to get to it right away. We're also going to be saving about 5 to 10 minutes at the end of our webinar today to be able to answer any other questions. So again, we like to have this be interactive. We find that the more questions that come up from our participants, the better off these webinars are. So you have an hour to pick our brains, so you might as well take advantage of that time. So let's go ahead and get rolling. So again, we're really excited to have our panelist, Lyn Sabino, back with us today. This is her 3rd webinar that she has joined us for. We're going to talk today about how to keep your strategic plan front and center. But a little bit about Lyn. She is a HR leadership development, strategic planning, and HR consultant, an executive coach with more than 25 years of experience in all of those areas. She's a board certified executive coach. She specializes in team and individual performance enhancement, and is a constant learner. Every time I talk to Lyn, she seems to be engaging in some sort of certification or learning or teaching or coaching. And she's just a really great addition to our webinars and what we do here at .org. She's skilled in a whole bunch of stuff. The table group team assessment, 6 types of working genius profile, Kendall Life Languages, Thomas Kilman's conflict mode, DISC, and learning style assessment. She has her master's of arts from Youngstown State University. She has an executive coaching certificate from the Weatherhead School at Case Western Reserve, board certified coach, senior professional in human resources. And my favorite 2 things, and I talk about this each time, she's a licensed massage therapist and a certified yoga instructor. So I just find that so fascinating. So Lyn, welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
All right. So, gosh, in our last couple of webinars we talked about the fundamentals of strategic planning. So we were really kind of into the nitty-gritty stuff. We were talking about how do you pick the team members, how do you engage in the strategic planning process. And today we're going to talk about, like, okay, we have all this done, we have our plan, so now what? I guess my first question today is, like, you know, when you're done with all of this stuff, you have this really great document, everybody's really excited about it. There's always going to be some challenges, though, when you go to implement your strategic plan. So what are some common challenges that organizations have when they're implementing their strategic plans, and what are some suggestions you would have to help them overcome those?
Yeah, you know, you can have the prettiest document. It can look really good, but if you don't do anything with it, then that's all it is pretty words on paper, and it's not going to get you anywhere. So And that is a hard part. The whole process is, time consuming, and if you've done it right, you've gotten a lot of people involved, and they all feel some sense of ownership of that plan. And that's really, in my opinion, the key is, people own what they help create. And so, making sure that your stakeholders, your staff, your board members, whoever has helped to create that plan, is really clear about what their role is in implementing the plan, and then being accountable for, what they're asked to implement. So, a well-written plan is going to have information about, what are the overall goals or strategic initiatives. And, I don't want to kind of quibble over the words goals, objectives, initiatives, those kinds of things. I mean, somebody will say, well, that's not really how you define a goal, or that's not, a goal is really an action step, or those kinds of things. So however you define your terms is whatever terminology you use in your plan. So let's say you say, we have a strategic plan, we have 3 strategic initiatives, broad initiatives, and within those initiatives, we've set some goals that have action steps that we need to accomplish in order to achieve the initiative. So that's kind of how I'm using that terminology. And so when let's say your first initiative is to develop new services and programs that will serve your constituencies. Well, that's pretty broad, but that's okay. A strategic initiative is supposed to be broad. Somewhere then in the work that you're doing on that initiative to develop specific goals and specific action steps, you're going to need to make sure that the goals that you're setting for them, the initiatives, are SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. And those are just the basic rules for goal setting. And then once you've done that, and you say, within the next 12 months, we want to identify 3 viable new services that we can implement over the life of the plan, which, let's say, is going to be 2 years or 3 years. So that's a SMART goal. And then, in support of that SMART goal, you'll need to have your action steps. So maybe, one of the steps is to research, is to look at competitors. What are they doing? Do some research on what kinds of other services are being offered to your constituents that maybe you're not doing right now. So you've got some of that legwork to do. Those are action steps. And then maybe after that, your next one is, once you gather all that information, then you need to, boil it down to maybe 2 or 3 that you want to take a look at, and so on. So your action steps are going to continue to refine, the information you're collecting in order to support that goal.
So do you think, like, so we're talking about challenges. Do you think that one of the biggest challenges is that some organizations may end up with this document and be so overwhelmed by it that they just don't even know where to start?
Yeah, but you kind of take care of that as you put your document together. I mean, if you're thinking ahead, like Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind. Yeah. You're looking at, that document should contain your action steps, and so those are some of the things that you're putting together, as you're preparing your plan for implementation. And so as you refine, like I said, as you refine those action steps that are going to support your goals, that should all be included somewhere in your plan or in ancillary documents that people are going to be using as they're working through, the action steps. And it's a lot. So you have to bite it off in small chunks. And, to be skilled at it, you're going to want to break it down into achievable action steps that can be done in a certain time frame by certain people. And, you need to let those people know what the outcomes are that you're looking for and what metrics you expect to get from those. And then that's the information that you take, in order to achieve the plan, whether it's develop new programs or implement new programs, those kinds of things. And when when we get to the strategic planning chart that we've got to show everybody today, maybe that'll become a little clearer how that might work.
Yeah, because I think what ends up happening, and I've seen this in organizations as well. I mean, ones that I work for, but I foreststory.org, you get these like really great plans and everybody's excited, and you've gone through the strategic planning process, which does take a lot out of you. I mean, it is something that does take a lot out of organizations, and then everybody gets back to their day jobs and, you know, is like, oh yeah, okay, I don't know how I'm going to have time for that. So I guess maybe that's a good, you know, segue into our next question of, you know, there was a lot of excitement, hopefully, because strategic plans are signaling, you know, forward and growth and things that should be exciting for organizations. And so many people, if it's done right, should be involved as part of that process, whether it's, you know, the official planning committee or focus groups that are providing information. But once the document's in hand, those groups are back on to doing their own things, right? So who's really in charge of getting this done, I guess, is probably a logical next step.
Well, you have to build it into people's workload, you know, follow up on the plan. So, and work on the strategic plan. Because I mean, you know, if you don't put something on your calendar, you're likely to miss it, right? And then at the end of the week, I should have done that on Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever. So you need to schedule it, you know, and people need to understand that this is part of our work now. And so during the time when you're pulling it all together, you know, you need to have realistic conversations with people that say, you know, what is this realistic amount of work that you can fit into we can fit into your workload in order to make sure that we can accomplish all the action steps we need to. And you have that conversation with teams, and then you have that conversation with individuals. And sometimes you might need to put some other things on pause. But if you don't, you've made time and you have, you know, you've made time to develop the plan. You must continue to make time to work the plan. And working your plan is going to take time over overtime, and then it'll take time out of the work week as well. But you have to be committed to that, or else again, you're going to have a nice, you know, package of papers that aren't going to get you anything unless you're consciously working the plan. But that's part of the planning process, is making sure that you've assigned accountabilities, that you have time frames, and that people are scheduling the work that they need to do.
Well, and I think to be clear too, you know, how it's assigned and how the accountability is set up is somewhat determined by the size of the organization too. You're going to have larger organizations may have higher level executives who will be responsible for certain components of their teams and reporting to the CEO or you know, EVP or whoever is really in charge of the implementation. Small organizations might be a little different. You know, everything may be driven by, you know, the executive director. It might be driven by the executive director and maybe the, you know, second in charge. So, but I think, you know, the one thing that accountability is that, you know, there has to be someone kind of driving the process. And that's often the hires up within the team and the board too, right?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you know, those kinds of responsibilities, the buck stops at the executive director's desk, right? And then beyond that, it stops at the board's desk, the board chair and the executive committee probably. So, you know, it's important to have buy-in from your board and, you know, at least the executive committee, and the chair can represent that executive committee. So that, you know, the nonprofits that I've seen do it successfully, there's a partnership there between the executive director or the leadership team of the organization and the leadership team of the board, so that everybody understands that, you know, we are committing to make this plan happen. That means we're going to have to devote some time to it. Let's agree on, you know, how much time and over what period of time. And so when you have those kinds of conversations, then nobody's blindsided. You know, there's a team that knows, you know, we've decided we're going to, you know, give 10 hours a week to working our plan. And here's how we're going to do it. And, and then you have to schedule regular reports, you know, progress to plan reports for the organization and for the board, so that everybody knows, you know, maybe your board meetings are every other month, let's say. And so every other month, part of your agenda should be strategic plan update. And, you might need to have some staff there, to talk about what they're doing. But, the board should be kept apprised, and perhaps, typically, board chairs work with executive directors, and they're the bridge, between communication to the board and communication to the organization. So between those two people, as long as you are keeping your eye on the ball and you are, your staff is clear that they've got work that needs to be done, they need to report in their leadership team. What's our progress to plan, for our specific area. So you have to build it in, it just has to be part of the expected workload. And it has to be just a natural part of, it's not something you do when you have time, because you'll never have time for it, unless you make the time.
That is so true. Well, one of the things that I would love to share with everybody today is you've been gracious to share a couple of your worksheets that you've developed. And we've talked about accountability, and that's really what this webinar is about, and it's important and necessary. So I do want to share this worksheet, and I would love for you to spend some time walking us through this. And so this is a sample strategic planning goal sheet, worksheet, that hopefully everybody can see that on their screen.
Yeah, okay. So, and so now there are many different ways you can do this. This is just one format that I've seen work really well. But if you can make this your own. But my recommendation is that you have these concepts on this form. So you say what your planning period is, and that would be your time frame. So maybe let's say it's an 18-month, or it's a 2-year strategic plan. And then you would make one of these worksheets for each of your strategic goals. And so let's say this one is develop a 2-year plan for program and service expansion. That's part of your strategy. And so you notice that it's specific. It's a 2-year plan. It's got a time, it's time bound. It seems attainable because it's a shorter period of time. It's relevant because this is what you've come out of your strategic planning process with, that you need to expand your programs and your services, so it meets the SMART goal metrics. And so then, in order to figure out how you're going to execute this goal, you'll want to break it down into action steps, which you can call objectives or action steps, you call it whatever you want. But these are the things you're going to need to do. And so the first thing you've decided you want to do is benchmark like programs for information on things like their budgets, their revenue streams, what they cost, their marketing strategies, participant demographics, whatever you've decided. And who is going to be responsible for that action step? You have an accountability column, and that's where you name the people who are going to execute this action step of the plan. Notice that above you've listed the team leader for this goal and all the members of this team. Your time frame is what's the completion date? When is this going to take place, this work? And here's one really important note for you, is that ongoing doesn't count as a time frame. If something is ongoing, it's likely operational. And this is strategic. We're looking at new stuff. We're looking to grow. We're looking to expand. So no fair putting ongoing anywhere in that column.
So the reason I turned my video off was because my screen is on the other side. I didn't want to be distracting to you looking the other way. But I do have to say, ongoing, as we put together our plans here, for .org, it's like we found ongoing for some of our longer term plans getting on there, like, well, this is dumb, right? It just means it's an operational goal. It's not a strategic goal. And so we got to the point where, like, we don't have a date on it, it doesn't go on the document. So I just had to chuckle when you said that, because we found ourselves doing that quite a bit. And there's no measurability of ongoing. So
so if it's ongoing, who does it? And if there is somebody already doing it, why does it need to be on your strategic plan? So yeah, don't get caught up in those nice phrases that look nice, but they don't mean anything. They're meaningless on a strategic plan.
Yeah, there's no murkiness on a strategic plan for sure.
And so that's why you should look at the resources that you need, the resources you have at your fingertips, and the resources you expect may come your way. So again, you can define resources any way you want, but what you need to look here is, what do you need to accomplish the action step? So that's why existing is important. You may have things at your fingertips that you can use, like a list of like programs with contacts, agreement on information to be collected, spreadsheet or database to record the information, a budget for travel to observe programs and meet with directors. Your list will be unique to you. But really take a look at your resources, because if you may have to spend some money, you may have to barter for some things, you may have to go, really looking and searching for some resources you need, but you don't want to be blindsided again. So do the best you can to figure out what you're going to need to get the action step done. And then some people like to lump together evaluation, measurement methods, and expected outcomes. And if that works for you, that's fine. I separated them out just so you could see the difference. And I've talked to a lot of people who say, well, they don't really seem to be very different to me. That's okay, as long as you cover your bases. This is not carved in stone in terms of this format. But in terms of evaluation, so how will you evaluate completion of the action step? How are you going to know when you're done? And so for this particular action step, we would be complete on our benchmarking visits and our analysis within our time frame. We would have collected all the information we need from each program. We could produce comprehensive, informative reports that would guide the board and the leadership team to make decisions. So those are the things you're going to have that are going to tell you you either completed your action step or you're really getting close. And then at the end, the outcomes, again, begin with the end in mind. And you should be thinking about these things before you actually get started is, what will it look like when it's successful? When this is all done, what's it going to look like? What specifically will indicate success? And so in this case, we're saying that we're going to have data we can use to analyze how we compare with others on the data points. We can offer one new program or service per year in the next 3 years, and we can increase our participant numbers by a percent, whatever the specific percent is each year. So this is where you can give yourself some real specifics and you can add some metrics. And if you look at the rest of it, the rest of the sheet, it's just got 3 more objectives or 3 more action steps on there with some information about each one. So you just repeat that, for each of the action steps. Now, if you have a team taking care of this, you might have the same names, in each one of the action steps, but you might divide your team up, and maybe you've got 5 team members and each one takes an action step, and then, you might need some additional help. So maybe they solicit some help from other staff folks or from the board or from some of the focus groups you've used or, your constituents. But having this on hand is really helpful to know who's responsible, in what time frame, and what should we end up with when they've completed their work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and what I think I like about this the most is that it's on one sheet. It's very simple to use. It's something that I think people can understand. There's not a ton of information that is bogging the document down, and it's something that can be easily shared and evaluated regularly. So, I love this kind of, this kind of sheet. And I think, for people, especially now when our attention spans are so short, that to have something, that you can refer to or put on a bulletin board or keep, nearby very easily on your desktop, it's a good thing. It's interesting. There was one thing that you said right when you were finished talking about the worksheet, was that there was probably some great opportunities to maybe you talk to some of your people in your focus groups, and you talk to maybe some of the committee members. I think that's a really great way to keep other people engaged in the
Yeah.
strategic planning process, especially if they gave you their time to participate initially, to have them continue to have buy-in. It never hurts to include them at later phases. It doesn't mean that their job is done at a certain point. And I think that creates value and great relationships, especially for the nonprofit.
Yeah, and if your board has committees, and if on those committees you have, non-board members, community members, those kinds of people, content experts, I like to see them involved in the planning process and then also in the implementation process. Because again, if they create it, they're going to invest and own it. And that's what you want. You want people who feel ownership for completion of these action steps. And they'll have time invested, and they will do good work for you. So use your board committees, use your community members, but have a leadership team member, lead the team. You typically want someone from the staff, a leader from the staff, to lead the team, unless you've got a really outstanding, you've got a board member who wants to do it, or you really have, an excellent content expert from outside the organization that you would trust to take leadership of one of these teams.
Yeah, and I think the board, involving the board, if you have a board that has good diversity of thought and knowledge and experience, I think a lot of times, I think nonprofits in general, it's very hard to manage boards, because it's a lot of work, right? It's a lot of work to manage boards, but oftentimes board members are very committed, but want to do more and they don't know how. And helping with strategic initiatives are so great, because the breadth of knowledge that comes from folks who may actually have a ton of expertise in the for-profit space can translate well, especially into strategic thinking and implementation too.
It's always important to have some outside eyes on your stuff.
Yeah.
So, get some objective eyes, some outside eyes on your work, and you'd be surprised at that. Sometimes opens up a whole new world to you of thought and operational practices.
Absolutely. So, strategic plans now, they're not as long most of the time now that they used to be. I mean, we used to hear like our strategic plan is 5 to 7 years, and now we're hearing 2 to 3 years because so much changes on a regular basis. That's still a long time though, to really stay motivated and on task. And there could be crazy things like a pandemic or world events, or who knows what other wacky things that go on that could just make it very difficult to stay motivated. Because I know a lot of nonprofits right now, I don't even want to say nonprofits. I think a lot of people now are just tired. And sometimes it's hard to stay motivated. It's hard to stay on task for, 2 to 3 year period. How do you, obviously you have the worksheet and you can do that. What are some other ways that you can keep your team motivated and your board motivated, and actually even yourself motivated to keep going, especially when some days you just feel like everything's kind of against you, right?
Yeah, it can be drudgery. It can feel like drudgery unless you, really, again, think ahead, plan for the work, make space for the work. What happens is, people say, well, I can postpone, or I can pause, some of these tasks that I'm doing to work on the strategic plan. But if you don't think that out ahead of time, at some point, those tasks that you're postponing or pausing are going to have to get done. So you really have to have some thoughtful conversation about, we're adding this strategic planning work on top of everybody else, on top of everybody's body of work. How are we going to do that and be, as fair as we can to everybody, and still yet get done, the essential things we need to do? So you've got to involve people in those conversations. They have to feel like you're making space for them to do some work, for them to do this work. And that means they need time to think, and they need time to research, and they need time to explore, and those kinds of things. And we're so fast paced that we don't make time to think. We think we're wasting time if we're sitting at, staring at, a wall or whatever, when, or out a window. And when we're really mulling things over, and that it's so important to have, time to consider and ponder and do some research. So, that making space, it's one of the most important things you can do. And then schedule regular updates. If people don't know when they're going to have to give their next report, people are going to put things off until the last minute. Typically, I mean, I do that. I do best under pressure. So when I know I've got deadlines, that's when I'm, at my best. If I don't have a deadline, I might wait a while, to get some stuff done that I should be doing. So schedule those things, schedule those updates, create time in your meeting agendas to give brief updates so that everybody, it's top of mind. And then, I don't, if your organization uses any kinds of incentives or anything like that, you might consider doing some of that. But I mean, this is work. This is not extra, that you're doing. This is part of what the organization needs to do to get, to be successful and to move forward. So
a couple of things that actually come to mind from what you're saying. Like one is being able to set boundaries, and
yeah,
and
know when to say no.
And not apologizing for that.
Yeah.
So I mean, I know that on Monday mornings now, I should say they're pretty much non-negotiable for me, that I won't schedule meetings on Monday mornings. It's my time to just kind of catch up and think and work on strategic initiatives or catch up on something that I may have fallen behind on, but that's like my non-negotiable time. And I've done it for pretty much the entire time I've had the company. So, and I know that is, and when you say about thinking, I know you and I had talked about that on a phone call, but I also, after our conversation, saw a blog on just taking time to just think and taking time to be and not having to do stuff all the time, which I think you're right, is very much against our kind of our fabric and the way things are going now. I wonder too, there's a lot of organizations that just have regular standing meetings because they've always had those regular standing meetings. Are there opportunities maybe for you to cancel some of those meetings? Absolutely. And give people that hour for strategic planning time, or that 2 hour, or are your meetings effective? Should your meeting only be an hour, but you're in a meeting for 3 hours because it's unstructured with no agenda? So, there's some, ways to actually run your day that could be very helpful and very beneficial as well.
Yeah, we pay lip service to making time, giving people time to do those kinds of things. We don't often do it. And, it's a perfect time to look at your meeting structure. One of the things that, when we talked about working genius, is one of the tools is how to make meetings better, more productive, take less time and still yet get a lot of things done. So there are ways to do that, and look at your meetings, look at what you seriously could pause in order to create space for the strategic planning work, and then do it. And don't just talk about it, actually do it, and make it okay to say no to a meeting, make it okay to, to block off time on your calendar. A lot of managers are really strict about watching people's calendars and how they're spending their time. I mean, you have to let go of some of that and, give people the space they need and the responsibility, to manage their time to get their work done.
Well, yeah, and you can't overschedule everybody's time and then expect them to do this stuff too. Right. And I think you're right, where, we're in an era where everybody has access to everybody's calendars. If there's not a culture of respect for other people's time, that does make it a little bit difficult, to be able to get that done. So let's talk a little bit about, organizations, I think, don't necessarily take enough time to celebrate their successes. And I think this may go along with the prior question. I think some of that is because you're limited to time and resources. So I know from time in nonprofit sectors, like you'd get something done, then it's like, okay, clean it up onto the next thing, clean it up onto the next thing, clean it up onto the next thing. And sometimes maybe it is even that, like, take a breath and think and celebrate. You know, I love your update sheet. I'm actually going to share this in a minute. I want you to walk us through this as well. It's a great tool for highlighting accomplishments. And I think also knowing what's next without having to just jump to it. So I'm going to share that document, and I'd love for you to go over this update. And I think, again, this is a great way for people to be able to track and share some of their successes. I'm going to share that now.
So this one also is really simple. It's just, what did you get done? What's the work completed? What's left to do in the planning period? And is there anything new that we've discovered needs to be, you know, incorporated into our work? So for whatever the period is. So you could do these monthly, you could do them quarterly. You should definitely do them mid-year, at the very least, mid-year and end of year. But, you know, quarterly is, in my opinion, the minimum that you should do. And smaller time periods if needed, you know, to keep work front and center with people. But so for work completed, you know, what was the objective, or what was the project, or what was the action step? And then when was it complete, and what's the status? What are the next steps? So that's where you can put your notes. So in this one, the example is, excuse me, identify and research programs that support the vision and mission and generate stable revenue. We finished that in July. We've identified programs and presented it to the board in July. That's done. What else, you know, didn't still yet needs to be done in the planning period? We've got, you know, some examples there. And what's the status? So you find out, you know, where you are at the time of reporting, what still yet needs to be done. And then, you know, and that takes you on then to your work for the next reporting period. Sometimes something new will come up. You'll discover something you didn't think about in the planning process. And so there's a place there to add some things that maybe you're going to need to find a way to incorporate. So it's really simple. It's a progress report. What did you finish? What do you still have left to do? And is there anything new that we need to add to our body of work? So these will really keep you oriented. These will keep you grounded. And the folks that have to complete these reports are going to be really clear about the progress they're making. And that's so important. Like, you know, you need, when you have, you know, an overwhelming task ahead of you, at least for me, when I can see that I'm making progress, I am much more likely to be, you know, eager to keep moving through it. When I can't get past the feeling overwhelmed because it's still too big, that's when I really start to spin a little bit, you know, and that's when I know I have to start breaking it down into smaller pieces. And for most people, you know, when they can start seeing the fruits of their labor, that's when they're really going to get, you know, even more motivated to finish it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it is easy when you're looking at some of these things to get overwhelmed. So it's almost like working on it's like going back to college and having a big project due all over again and still having all the other classes on your schedule, right? You're kind of like, oh, there's so
like your thesis on top of everything else, you know?
Yeah, all that good stuff. But, you know, I think what I love about, again, this sheet is its simplicity. I mean, I think that, you know, anytime that you can simplify anything and you can make it visually appealing. I mean, you can make this as, you know, you can add color to it. There's a lot of ways you can customize. Be really pretty. Yeah, anyways, you can customize it. I mean, you know, these are things, maybe you have them hanging in the break rooms, or maybe you, you know, every staff meeting, you start off with a strategic planning update and you share a document or something. Maybe you have maybe the big poster, right? You know, maybe somebody gets to go check it off. Or
that could be a thermometer. You know, there's lots of ways to, and you report to your board. And let the staff report to the board. You know, I mean, let them tell the board members, or let them tell the board committees, you know, what they've been doing. And they're the ones that are closest to it. They know all the nuts and bolts, and they can answer questions about it. So get them involved in that kind of, report back, and you have much more engaged people.
Well, I this is kind of a side note for this, but we've worked on a lot of stuff with hiring, and obviously, we're trying to hire, and you hear all the hiring horror stories out there, and one of the things that employers are leaving places because they're not engaged, or they don't feel like they've been given opportunities to shine or grow. And this is such a great opportunity to be able to provide people with that, I think, don't you?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again, Sarah, just a question just came through the chat that said, what do you think is the biggest obstacle that prevents an organization from completing a plan? And I think that engagement is one of the biggest obstacles. That, if it's only the responsibility of the director to see it through, I mean, then you might as well just tell them what to do instead of create a plan and try to work your plan. But that engagement, that ownership, that people have to feel vested, they have to feel ownership of the work. And one of the ways to help them feel ownership is to give them some responsibility for getting it done. And the reward typically then is that they feel a sense of achievement, they feel a sense of accomplishment, they feel worthy. And they will be more than likely to follow through and be excited and engaged about it. And that's when you get your best energy and synergy in your organization, is when, and notice that one of the things on this form in the middle part there, talks about the status, including interdependence on other goal teams. Remember, you might have 2 or 3 or 4 different goal teams that are working. They need to talk to each other. And so that also creates some synergy, that when they find out that one goal team is working on an action step and another goal team might have discovered something that other team can use, and vice versa. So this is a wonderful opportunity to create communication channels within your organizations that may not already exist, and to get people talking to each other, and that interdependence and that integration of people in disparate teams that can really move you forward.
I started to think about, as you were talking about boundaries, and we're talking about accountability, and you're talking about interconnected teams. How would you recommend, or do you recommend having at the beginning of the launch, the plan is done, we're kind of launching, we're getting ready to go and getting ready to get started. Do you recommend setting up some, how do I want to say this? Do you recommend almost like having everybody get together and agree on, okay, we're going to allot X amount of, like every other Thursday in the afternoon, we're going to create a block of time for strategic planning meetings, so that people don't get behind, and these are times that nobody is to schedule anything on their calendar unless it's an emergency, or obviously vacations. I think we don't want people to not take their vacations. But do you recommend maybe setting some ground rules or some guideposts, I guess, for people to do that? And do you have any recommendations or things that you've seen to be really successful?
Yeah, absolutely. That's an awesome idea. And I mean, again, that just lends it, when you, a lot of times people are looking to the director to say it's okay to do something. Okay, so is it really okay for us to cancel a regularly scheduled meeting so that we can talk about strategic planning? Yes, it's okay. And since you are the ones working on this particular activity, you are best to tell me how much time you need, when you need it, and we'll make it happen. So you've got to give them, again, some responsibility for that time management. They know best in their schedule, when they can pull, an impromptu meeting together or a scheduled meeting. So yeah, let them be involved in those kinds of decisions. And again, you have these conversations across the organization. And you mentioned the kickoff, when you kick off your plan, you reiterate that our board is invested, our leadership team is invested, our staff is invested, and our focus groups are invested as well. So, here's how we're going to work together. And here's what we have agreed. We can pause, or we can, change. We can reorganize in order to create space in our schedules to work our plan, and lay it out. And the more visual it is, and the more everybody knows it, the better they're going to be able to execute it. Um, so yeah, over communicate it, but let people be involved in creating what that space looks like to work the plan.
So I'm really interested, there's a lot of, we're seeing in the nonprofit sector, a lot of retirements of senior leaders. We're seeing a lot of young and up and coming leaders taking over organizations that have had some of the same leadership teams for sometimes decades. I think there's a big leadership shift. And while I think that is great in terms of, new energy, new ideas, new adaptabilities and things like that, I think some of the challenges for young leaders one of the biggest challenges for young leaders is that they haven't really been developed as leaders. And I think sometimes as a way to prove themselves, they take everything on, or they may not be willing to let certain things go. What are some tips that you may have for young leaders who may be leading a strategic initiative for the first time, or maybe actually leading the overall strategic plan for the first time, and as maybe an executive director?
Yeah, so if you're a director and you are, trying to develop, someone who has leadership potential, give them an opportunity to do something big and be there as a resource person for them. But, maybe the strategic plan implementation is that person's responsibility instead of yours as the director. Of course, you're ultimately responsible for it, but, this is a really good opportunity to give somebody some responsibility that's bigger than they have ever had. And it requires them to engage other people in the organization. So you get to see, are they able to help people connect? Are they able to communicate? Do they have the thought processes to analyze what needs to be done, and to make sure that things are coordinated? It's really an excellent opportunity. And I've seen it happen in one of the organizations I was involved with. And that person then eventually became the executive director when the director retired. Fortunately, so and your board, could potentially get involved here too, and support, that person in taking on more responsibility, and encouraging that person in taking on more responsibility. So there are lots of ways, to make that happen. And it also gives you an opportunity then to find out what are the areas where we're going to really have to work with this person to develop. We want to cultivate the strengths, but we also need to develop some skills and some abilities that may not be where you need them to be for leadership. Does that make sense? I don't know if that answered your question, but
no, I think it did, because you touched on something else too about strengths, and we're big into DISC and strength finders and a lot of these other tools to just kind of understand kind of the core working styles and abilities of our team. And I think they're extremely helpful when used for the greater good, not the greater evil. Because I do see some organizations who actually embrace them and will say, like, okay, we understand, like, maybe when there's tension, or maybe when something's not going right, you actually step back and say, like, okay, I have to think about how I operate and where I fall within these parameters, as opposed to maybe the person that I'm having a conflict with, or there's a challenge. It's like, I may be the problem, not that person. And I think that's where really understanding working styles is really important to effective strategic planning and implementation, because you don't want to give somebody, you may have somebody who is like knock it out of the park in research and data analysis and all this kind of stuff, but has no ability to put anything together in a coherent
Yeah.
document to share, though they're a valuable part of that team. And that's okay. How do you feel about that?
Well, because you likely have other people that can do that. And that's what, you and I have been talking about Lencioni's new tool, the 6 types of working genius. And I just think it's a miracle. That tool is a miracle because I mean, and there are a lot of them out there. You said DISC, Strengths Finder, there's Life Languages, there's tons of them, Myers-Briggs, they're all out there. The best tool is the one that you use. You probably have reports from every one of them, and they're in a file folder in your drawer, and you probably haven't looked at them in a long time. And you might not have talked, among your teams about, where are your strengths and how can we capitalize on strengths. When we look at the working genius, it's more a productivity tool than it is a personality inventory. It's about 80-20, 80% productivity. And that's the key to getting something like this done, is knowing where people get their energy and their joy from their work and giving them the opportunity to do those things. Because when you have a team, you're going to, everybody's going to have some space where they have a genius. And they're ready, the genius of wonder, they have big picture thinking, the genius of galvanizing, bringing people together, to make something happen. The genius of discernment, the ability to see whether is this plan the way it's written really going to work. And if it does, then we're going to need some people to carry that out. So, it's really important that, and this is what happens a lot of time in leadership development, is that we're not looking at those things about people, and we're expecting them to do things that drain their energy, that sap them of their strength, and that eventually cause them to fail. So we want to set people up to succeed. We want to set them up to get joy and energy out of their work. And when you do that, that's when your plan succeeds. That's when you get your work done. That's when your organization moves forward. So there are answers out there for those kinds of questions relative to how do I get my staff to engage, and how can I build synergy in my organization?
Yeah, I just wonder, and we didn't even talk about this. We've talked about those different tools separate from the prep for our webinars, but I wonder, it's like how valuable would something like that be to even launch, as you're launching your strategic plan, if you don't have an understanding of your team in those particular ways, how can you assign people to complete those tasks? So I just wonder that, you think, gosh, could that be a really awesome, valuable tool to help create that alignment between, what you want to get done and who are the right people to do it?
Invaluable, it really is. And the anecdotal information that's coming in about the tool is that knowing that about your people has really created, has saved some organizations, honestly. It sounds dramatic, but it's really true. Has really pushed some teams forward to excel in ways they never thought they could.
Well, and I think the topic's so interesting. I mean, for people on this webinar who don't know what we're talking about, it's basically, if you're working on something and you all of a sudden look up the clock and it's 4 hours later and you don't know where your time went, that's your zone of genius, or your area of genius. So, I mean, there's a lot more complex than that, but I think that the premise behind it is where do you lose, almost like kind of where do you lose yourself in your work, where you're the most happy and the most fulfilled, and that's kind of the place that you should be a majority of the time. And that's going to bring the most success to the organization.
Yeah, it's an amazing tool. I'm happy to talk about it with anybody who's interested in using it. It's inexpensive, and it's amazing.
Yeah, well, we're excited to try it, actually. So, well, we have about 6 minutes left, and if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put those in the Q&A. And as we kind of wrap up today, any last minute thoughts or other ideas to make sure that the plans get implemented properly?
Yeah, just, involve your people, give them some responsibility, let them let them do their best work, you know, where they're most energetic, where they have the most, where they get the most joy out of their work. Uh, Push them, challenge them, um, involve your board, involve the board committees, you know, and if you do that from the beginning, and you create that sense of investment and that sense of ownership, you have a much greater chance of being successful than if you don't. Don't take it all on yourself if you're the director. You know, you really need to use all your resources to execute your plan. And plans that don't get executed, typically, those are the kinds of things that get missed. The people part of the plan. It's not that hard to make a list of action steps and goals and those kinds of things that you want to do. The biggest piece is the people part, and what they bring to the table and how they execute the work that needs to be done.
All right. Well, Lynn, thank you so much. And before we head out, I'm going to kind of say like, wow, it's already the first season of the .org coffee shop webinars. We don't have any more on the schedule for right now, but we are planning our fall sessions. So look for that information to come out soon. If you are attending this webinar, you will automatically receive information on our upcoming webinars for the fall. So look for those. We should have information out probably midsummer to August so that you can plan your schedule. And if you want to reach out to Lynn or to me, here is our contact information. And we would certainly be happy to talk to you more about this topic or actually working with your team on its strategic plan. So Lynn, again, it's been a pleasure talking to you these last 3 months and all the times in between. And this is just such great information. And I know a lot of organizations are going to be diving into their strategic plans, and this is certainly going to be great information for them to share. So
my pleasure. It's been an awesome experience. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you. Take care, and we hope to see all of you soon.